I'll pass a witness, Judge.
Thank you, Mr. Conley. Anybody else? No.
I have redirect. I have redirect. I'm just waiting to
Ms.
see.
Parker, do you have any questions? Ms. Henderson?
Well,
You're muted.
just wants it if she can remember this.
Okay.
Ms. Henderson, we talked about Carrie being arrested twice since she was with Dennis Price. Are you aware of how many times Dennis Price and family called on Carrie?
A lot. I mean, I don't know how to say it. 10 times. I would
Would
average.
it be surprising to you to hear that the police reported it was 116 times?
On Carrie alone. I
Yes,
can't believe that. I can't even believe that.
well, it's a police report. That's all.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I do, Your Honor.
Okay, Ms. Lane.
A few quick redirects, please. Ms. Henderson, let's get real clear, because I think what Mr. Davis is trying to infer is that you were using drugs, had an infant at home, your mother and your sister knew about it, and they never called CPS. So I would like, okay, I need to give you a chance to explain that, and don't worry about exact dates. Just tell us, was there a time that your mother and sister would have known that you were taking care of that baby and on drugs?
No, absolutely not. Within
Okay.
6 months of me starting to do drugs, when he was about a year and a half, 2 years old, I lost him. So there was no, and my behavior wasn't erratic or anything. You know, I was just doing a little here and there. And when the husband got out and got violent, that's when I lost the baby. So there was no indication that I was on drugs.
Okay, so the other, right, the other part of their question and inference is that you were the victim of family violence and your mother and sister knew about it and never reported that to CPS because there was a child around. Is that true?
By the time he started mistreating me, like I said, he was very strange about it. He would bring me into the same room as Wesley on purpose. So I immediately pressed charges on him because I thought there was something very strange about that. And my mom actually took me to the police department to press charges, and I discussed it. I didn't want to do it because it was such minor things. And I knew he would go to jail for it. But I discussed it with my mom. Do you think I should do this? You know, because it's very strange and I don't want Wesley experience something worse. You know, I don't feel comfortable with what's unfolding, you know.
So then he went to jail after you reported that, is that right?
Well, he was put on probation for it and he went to jail for using drugs. That was the first time he used drugs during our marriage.
Okay. So during the time, there's other inference that nobody in the family came and checked on you when you were using drugs, and you're kind of left out on your own. This tight family of y'all's was not so tight after all. Is it possible that Jamie came and checked on you and you may not have remembered because you were on dope?
That's very possible. If I didn't, it wasn't just being on dope, but I was being abused pretty severely. And sometimes, I don't know, I wouldn't even know what was going on around me.
Would there be times when you'd lose consciousness or an awareness of your environment?
That and worse. It was pretty severe stuff.
How many
But
days?
I was on drugs with him and it was just us two and it just got real ugly. I was
That
like,
was after Wesley had been removed, is that right?
yes, ma'am.
Okay. Was were Jamie and James welcome over at the house with you and Mr. Cunningham?
I don't know what he would tell them. You know, like I said, a lot of times I couldn't even get up out of the bed. It was a pretty severe situation, and I don't remember a lot of it.
So there's
somebody would come in the house. That's the only time I knew if somebody came by or not.
So it could be that somebody came to visit you, James and Jamie and some friends of theirs, and he could have ran them off and you would have never known about it. Is that right?
Right. And I imagine my sister Jamie would have been terrified in that situation. Maybe that's why I never quite saw her. Maybe she was from afar. Terrified. Because that's how she is.
You were clear whenever you answered Mr. Davis's question about Carrie. He said he lost her rights to Wesley, and you said no, she signed them over. Do you know
Yes,
why
ma'am.
do you know why she signed her rights over to Wesley?
I don't know why. I mean, from what I understand,
Objection, she just
That's
said,
okay.
I don't know why. Yeah.
Not a problem. That's okay. We're going to ask you another question. Was she with Dennis at that time?
yes, ma'am.
Okay. So you testified about an incident that happened over 21 years ago. So you're 43 now, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Tony? So, and James and Jamie got in a heated argument. Had you ever seen James be aggressive or physically violent with Jamie?
No, that's why with knowing his history when I met him, that's why I got in between them and was like, this isn't going to happen in front of me, so y'all might as well just forget it.
So how long do you know roughly, was he kind of new to the family at that time?
Before they had Luke, I believe so. I'm not real sure on when they got together. I think she got pregnant pretty soon, within a year or two after meeting him.
Okay. So your sister married a man who had been accused of killing somebody. That frightened you.
They didn't, once I give people a chance. Actually, this has nothing to do with anything, but that's why I ended up giving my husband, James Cunningham, a chance, because I met James and he was such a decent guy. I figure with the bad rap, I don't know what happened, but and I saw their happiness and I thought, well, you got to give people a chance. And I thought it went the opposite way for me.
Okay. Did it work out good for Jamie?
It seems to be. She's really happy, and we all love him and accept him as our family member.
So if you knew him like you know him today on that incident over 20 years ago, would you have felt like you needed to step in between them?
Oh, I'd still step between them probably.
Why is that?
Because it's my sister, and that's how we are.
Okay, fair enough. So when you moved out when you were 15, did your mom and John want you to go?
No, they were very, very against it,
Would you say you were rebellious?
to say the least.
Okay. You said you started using drugs at a younger age. What was your drug whenever you started using drugs?
I didn't have any. Pot, I guess, would be the main one.
And so did you, the methamphetamine, is that something that started later in your life?
I used a little when I was younger, but nothing significant.
That led to problems?
Right.
I pass the witness.
Miss Henderson, where was your CPS case?
It was in Llano County.
Okay. So I guess, was I the prosecutor? Do you remember?
I was so messed up at the time. I think it was a man, because I remember being in trouble for going to court not dressed correctly and him telling us off pretty badly.
That was probably the judge.
Oh, a prosecutor. I'm sorry, ma'am. It's possible. Yes, ma'am.
And you're still married to Cunningham?
Shamefully, yes, ma'am. I'm a real procrastinator when it comes to legal matters. I don't even know where to begin. Call legal aid, I guess. I don't know if
Ms. Lane, look, your family's big on filing pro se motions, do it that way. And so he is Wesley's father, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And so he was terminated also, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And
we both signed our rights off so that Carrie could take custody.
okay. And was Carrie with Cody at that time?
Yes, ma'am. It was a joint effort on both of their parts to get him out of CPS custody. And it wasn't easy.
Did they adopt through CPS?
They immediately became foster parents and adopted. I don't know if they go through CPS to do that or not. They did the kind where you don't get money from the whatever that is.
Okay. Miss Henderson, did you have a relationship, or were you friends or acquaintances with Mr. Dennis Price before Carrie passed?
No, I mean, for Carrie's sake, I would speak to him sometimes, where's Carrie, WC, or I spoke to him once. She was in a meeting at the MHMR, and he was just telling me that, because were sharing a phone at the time, because she didn't have one. So when I called, sometimes he would pick up.
Okay. And did you know any of the Price family?
No, ma'am.
Okay. And you don't know any of them since either, correct?
I've seen Nancy before, the day that she pulled over me and my mom we were looking at the Connex place to see if they had put it up for sale, and Nancy pulled up behind us and got out of the truck and came up to the window and tried to talk to my mother. And that's the only time I've seen her, or any of them for that matter, in person, except for Dennis. I've met Dennis before.
Okay.
With Karen.
Do you have a relationship with Wesley now?
I do not.
Okay.
Ever since Carrie's death, he was able to go to the hospital with us when his mother Carrie was dying. But since then, I don't think they want him around the drama at all.
Okay. And his biological, y'all do a bunch of everybody terminates their parental rights, which everybody still has relationships with kids. Does Mr. Cunningham have a relationship with Wesley?
I think he's in prison.
Yeah, but
he's been there for probably 10 years or more.
Okay, so it probably doesn't. Do you have a condition of parole that you're supposed to be gainfully full-time employed?
I don't think it's full-time, but I think I'm supposed to be employed. I work for my mother, and I've told them that, my parole officer.
Why don't you have I hate to say real job, but a job out in the community other than working for your mom?
It's been acceptable to my parole officer, and I'm kind of terrified of having a real job, and I haven't tried. And putting my record out there on the line, I haven't even tried. It's terrifying to think about.
Who pays your bills?
I live with my friends, and when I work for my mom, I give them the extra money she gives me $100 extra a month because of the sale of that property over on Midland. It's still being paid for, and she considers it because we had a piece of property right next to it that me and my family lived on and helped pay for, but it went back, but it paid for I'm forgetting my words, but our equity paid for the other piece of property.
Okay.
So she's helping me.
How, your mom is an intervenor and she's requested a home study, and home study's been done. How could she take care of Dennis, baby Dennis, if she needs help taking care of her animals and help around the house, when a baby's a heck of a lot harder to take care of than a house?
I wouldn't say she needs the help. She's helping me by, and she can afford to pay me. So, she's trying to help me mainly.
So it's more helping you out than helping her out kind of deal.
If she can pay to get some help, a lot of people do. They can do it themselves, but they still have a housekeeper come, and she has the money to pay for it. So I'm sorry.
So more to keep you busy, so to keep you out of trouble, possibly, right?
Yes. And, I have a lot of mental issues, and, I'm not real good out in public. I don't like being around people, and I think my whole family kind of feels sorry for me sometimes.
Do you drive?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you have a car?
Yes, ma'am.
How often do you go to Jamie and James's house?
Only recently. It's only been to do this court stuff or a special occasion, a birthday or the wake, or, when there's a gathering.
Well, if you've been out since January of 22, how come you hadn't been over there more? If she's your sister and y'all are so close, how come you hadn't been over there more than that?
I don't like getting out a lot if I don't have to. And she always has a lot of people there, and I'm just not a very social person. I'd rather sit at home and watch TV and be by myself.
Okay. Now, you said you have, we got Wes the situation, and I'm sorry you had a child pass away. I'm sorry for that. Your remaining child, where is that child, and do you have a relationship with that child?
Yes, ma'am. She's in Arizona where her dad and her grandmother lived, and I have a good relationship with her.
Okay, thank you.
And she actually had the relationship with Wesley, so that's a way that I keep in touch if I can.
Right. Wesley's adopted dad is named Cody. Would Cody let you have a relationship if you reached out?
I'm not sure with my past. It's possible that he wouldn't want to bring any problems on his family. I haven't reached out for that reason. And I just don't want to put any pressure on them that they don't already have going on.
Okay,
But I would like to.
I understand. Anybody else have any questions, Ms. Henderson? No. Okay, anybody have any objection? Ms. Henderson's excused.
No objection, Your Honor.
Thank you. Ms. Henderson, you're excused. Thank you.
Thank you.
Your Honor, I'd like to recall Jamie Dyer. All right. So, Ms. Dyer, we were talking at another hearing, I believe. The judge was asking Ms. Moore about, or somebody was speaking about criminal trespass warnings. Have you had any opportunity to go ahead and get a criminal trespass warning for your property?
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Miss Henderson. Miss Henderson or Angelica, could you log her off? Or
Yeah.
mute?
Okay.
When Carrie was still alive, I got a CTW against Dennis for our property in Granite Shoals, where one of the places that Carrie would run away to would be our property in Granite Shoals. Our kids live over there, so it would be a place for her to go. So there's a CTW over there.
Okay.
What is a CTW?
A criminal trespass warning.
Okay, I've never heard it called that. Okay.
Okay. And then you have the other property where y'all currently live. Is there a criminal trespass warning there?
Yes, actually, I've done it twice here. I had one already, but when he was released on bond, I went ahead and had an updated one done for our home here in Buchanan, and I also had one done for my workplace at Wells Fargo, since he and his family have made a habit of popping up in both places.
And where did you obtain those criminal trespass warnings from?
Llano County for here and Wells Fargo, and Burnett County for the Granite Shoals home.
Okay. May I have opportunity to share my screen, please?
Yes, ma'am.
Ma'am.
Okay. And so I'm trying to make it bigger, but I'm not having any luck. Here I am. Yay. All right. So is this the document you've received that reflects the criminal trespass warning?
Yes, ma'am.
And is your address that's being protected 1 Lane in this one?
Correct.
Is that your signature on the document at the bottom, owner agent?
A very sloppy one, but yes.
Okay. And there's another document, and it's for the Wells Fargo as well. And somebody on behalf of Wells Fargo had to sign that one. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. That's Coese Piles' signature. She is a banker, another banker where I work.
And then is this the one you were speaking, you had them done at 2 different times, one after Mr. Price was released on bond and one before, is that correct?
I believe so.
For the
Yes,
same
that
property?
one's dated 2022.
Okay. And then whenever you received these documents from Llano County Sheriff's Department, did they just go ahead and forward you all the different ones that were as related to Dennis Price?
I requested that they email copies for me for my records.
Okay. And so any additional ones would be for people who aren't y'all that you did not request. Is that right? You're not
I didn't
Kimberly
request.
Harris or Weldon Roberts, correct?
I didn't request those, and I don't know those people. They probably just got emailed in the shuffle.
Okay. So I'd like to offer Intervenor Dyer's Exhibit 14.
Okay, next witness, Ms. Lang.
Your Honor, I would ask if Angel was subpoenaed. That was a conversation we had. I do not see her in the court, but if she has been, I have not seen a record of a subpoena as to Mr. Dyer's daughter. If she is here, that would be my next witness. Does anybody know if she's here?
Okay. Hadn't heard any beeps or anybody coming in. So did she receive the subpoena? Ms. Lang, did she receive the subpoena?
I don't know that one was ever sent out, Judge. I never received a copy of one. Mrs. Shell was was the one who was inquiring about it. So I just want to make sure that that's not something to be addressed. So my next witness, Your Honor, although I don't know that he's present, he was in court at the last hearing, would be Mr. Shane Moore. But if he's not present, then I can't call him. I did not subpoena him, but he was present at the last hearing.
Right.
He's not present, nor, I
Go on, Mr. Davis. He's not
was
present.
gonna say he's not present, nor did I know that anybody wanted to talk to him, or we would have made him available.
Right. Okay. Next witness, Ms. Lane.
So, Your Honor, those are all of the witnesses that I have, and I will rest.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Conley, I can't remember, it's been going on so long, I can't remember if I asked Ms. Shell if y'all had any witnesses.
We do not at this time, Judge.
Okay, thank you. Ms. McClure, do you have any witnesses?
Yes, I'm Nancy McDougall, the CASA. She's been the boots on the ground as far as
Oh,
observing
wait a
our visits.
Y'all, sorry, Ms. McClure, Ms. Parker, I'm sorry. Do you have any witnesses?
No.
No, ma'am. Okay, I apologize. Okay, Ms. McClure, go back. Ms. McDougall?
Yes, she's my witness, and Judge, I think we would be hard pressed to be able to get done in 20 minutes.
Let's
I don't think I
start.
have any questions.
Let's go. You got. Hold on. Attorneys, Ms. Parker, CASA. Ms. Greenwald has to be gone at 11:45. I think she has court in another county that she has to drive to, but we can finish today with another reporter. And that would make me a really happy camper if we could get that done. I don't anticipate we would go, all afternoon. How does everybody, the other reporter can't come on until about 12:45 though. So that would at least give everybody time to break for lunch and regroup. How does everybody feel about that?
Judge, I have a video medical appointment at 12:45 with my endocrinologist. I could be available by 1:30.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I'm pretty booked for the afternoon, so I thought we were kind of hard stopping. I might be able to move one of the appointments around, but it would be tough for me.
If it helps, I'll waive my questions to Ms. McDougall. We can hear what CASA says, and I'll just leave it be, and that'll speed up some too. And I think we can almost get it done.
Okay.
I don't anticipate any questions.
Okay. And if we have to get in the bond conditions, if somebody could just tell me what the bond conditions are, or somebody could send me a copy of the bond, I can read just probably quicker than y'all can do the testimony.
All right.
So
How about I arrange with the district attorney's office to do that?
So, Your Honor, are we going to get a new reporter that,
I'm
how's
trying
this,
to finish by 11:45.
Your Honor, I'd like time for closing argument as well. So I don't know that we're going to get it all done by 11:45 with Ms. Dougal's testimony, just to say.
Miss Greenwald, can you ask Mr. Stevens if he could come on at 12:30?
I'm trying, Judge. He's in a hearing right now.
Okay, and that might give everybody 30 minutes to let Mr. Rogers go do his thing at 1 o'clock or whatever.
And what is your current position?
I am retired.
And what was your position whenever you were a working woman?
I was a public school educator. I taught for 8 years, 5 of which were with children who had a classification of emotionally disturbed. And I was an elementary school counselor for 21 years, and I had my licensed professional counseling certification.
And what kind of experience did you have as an LPC? Who all did you see as patients?
Primarily within the public school setting. So I would have visits with children, with parents and teacher conferences.
And so do you have any idea how many hours of observation or counseling you did during your time?
Well, I was full-time for 21 years as a counselor, so quite a few hours.
And so you're not, some CASAs do not have that background, and yet they come in and volunteer as CASAs, correct?
Correct.
They might have been an accountant, they might have been a doctor, they might have been a lot of things, but they didn't have your kind of qualifications.
No, they did not. They do not.
How many hours approximately have you observed visits between various family members and this child?
I have observed every visitation except one. And so that's been about 12 hours with the Dyer family and 12 hours with the Moore's family, about 3 hours with the great aunts, and about 3.5 hours with the Parkers.
And I know that you've also visited the child at current placement. Do you know approximately how many hours you've been able to spend either talking with placement, catching up with placement, observing the child in placement?
I visited with placement probably 4 or 5 times, and I've also
visited 2 different daycares that Dennis has been with and observed him in that setting.
So I know we're kind of pressed for time, so I'm going to kind of cut to the chase here. From on the Moors, from the beginning to the end, tell us how it went at the beginning versus how it's been towards the end, and what your overall impression is.
Okay, with the Moore family,
Yes.
Abigail Moore is obviously very dedicated to this child. She always seemed to be very anxious about what was expected of her, and it looked like she really wanted to make a good impression. I was surprised that she had her phone out taking pictures as often as she was. Everybody took pictures once or twice of the child, but Abigail tended to do it more frequently. The last time I observed them between her and Canyon, they had over 10 times that the camera was out taking pictures. Somebody had mentioned earlier about her hovering. She tended to stay very close to baby Dennis. For example, when he was old enough to walk on his own holding a rolling toy, she would still walk behind him, holding onto his shoulders. They always brought toys, lots of times musical toys, toys that, where they would try to entice him with. And they would generally choose the activities for him to do instead of him being able to choose his own actions. As time went on, I saw more opportunities for him to make choices of what to do. They spent a lot of time feeding him, sometimes as often as 30 minutes out of the hour and a half that they had with him. When Miss Moore would speak with the baby, she would use a very high-pitched voice, but she would not use the same voice to communicate with other people like Kenyon or the time that her children came or the 2 times that her husband came. Mr. Moore was only available to come twice. And I thought it really interesting that the first time he was there, it was like 24, 25 minutes before he ever spoke to the baby, and over 45 minutes before he ever picked him up. And I mean, this is a pretty small room. And it may have been because Mrs. Moore was so close and engaged to him. During the very last session, one of the things Mrs. Moore did that was really helpful with the feeding, she brought what I would call, instead of a high chair, a low chair, where the baby could sit in a chair and then have a tray placed in front of him so that she fed him that way, and that seemed to work well. And let's see, what else? The very last session, it seemed like after we had the court placement hearing where someone had mentioned her hovering, she made a very concerted effort to stay farther away from him and give him room to explore. But she didn't still communicate with him that much. She would stay far away, but she'd be real quiet. And he would still come to her periodically. But one of the good things that happened out of that session was that Canyon was able to interact with the baby much better. Before that, he'd been kind of your typical teenage boy. I mean, being interested in a baby, really, they would have a little bit of interaction, but not much. But at the very last session, he really did have a lot of interaction. So that's probably what I got out of 12 hours.
And how would you rate the bonding, if any, that you saw between the child and Miss Moore?
Just, your typical kind of interaction. He didn't seem bonded as in, oh gosh, I really love you, I care about you, but a typical touching base periodically is what I noticed.
Now let's go to the Dyers, and I'd like to ask you to do the same thing that you just did for the Dyers and their visit.
Okay. From the beginning, the interaction of the Dyers with the baby seemed to be much more natural. There wasn't anything that was forced or uncomfortable. They seemed very relaxed. There was a lot of laughter. From the get-go, the interaction was not based on toys as much as it was interactive, what I would call games. He would go up to James and take James's ball cap off, and James would try and put it back on, and he'd take it off again, that kind of interaction. Or if James tried to put it on him, he was like, no, I don't want the hat on. They also, one of the toys in the room were some plastic crayons, 3 different colored crayons. And, he got into putting them on Jamie or on James, that kind of interaction. Or if he went over to play with the kitchen area, he would drop a toy, like a piece of food or a dish or something, and they would pick it up and hand it to him, and they would get into a game that way. They pretty much let him take the lead in things. They would bring toys too, simple toys like a ball, or there was a stuffed monkey or a little dinosaur, and they had him in a bag, and he would pull them out and play with them. There was a lot of being on the floor with him and having those interactive games, and like I say, pretty much letting him take the lead in choosing the activity. They tended to play songs for him because he liked music a lot. And then the feeding times were shorter. They did not bring like a chair for him to sit in like Miss Moore did, but they would sit on the couch, and the baby would generally be in James's lap. Jamie would open up a container and use the top of the container to put 1 or 2 pieces of food on, letting him choose to pick up and practice that fine motor skill. And occasionally in the midst of this, especially towards the end of their sessions, towards the number of sessions, he would want to get down, stop eating, get down. They would put the food away. And later on, if he saw the container, he'd come back and crawl up and have another 2 or 3 bites. And that might go on for 3 or 4 times with him playing in the midst of that, until Jamie would like hide the container, and then he wouldn't eat as much. So less eating, more letting him control with fine motor each of the bites he took. And as we look at the progression of the visitations, when they got to the last one that I observed, it was really interesting. He would go play, and then he would go over to either James or Jamie, lift up his hands to be picked up, and they would put him on his lap and talk with him, and he would kind of nod, and then he would wind down and then go off and play. And it was like he was checking in, just checking to make sure you're watching me, and and I care about you, and you care about me. And so in that sense, there was certainly bonding that was more visible than what I saw during the Moore's interaction.
Judge, I know we're real close to 11:45.
I'm sorry, what?
I was just saying, Judge, I know we're real close to 11:45.
Okay, I'm going to go on and put on the record for Mr. Stevens who everybody is, just so we have this down. Everybody ready?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Ms. Stevens, you ready?
Yes,
Department
ma'am.
is here, represented by their CPS, Mr. Raphael Tovar, and his supervisor, Ms. Jacinta Mouton, and their attorney is Mr. Dwayne Rogers. Mr. Dennis Price, the second, is here. He is obviously here, represented by Mr. Jeffrey Conley. The maternal grandma intervener is Miss Billy Parker. She's pro se. The paternal aunt, Miss Abigail Moore, is here. She's represented by Mr. Nicholas Davis. The maternal aunt, Miss Jamie Dyer, is here. She's represented by Miss Becky Lang. CASA as the child is Dennis Price III, and his representatives are Miss Nancy McDougall as the CASA guardian ad litem advocate. Her supervisor is Miss Kaylee Williman, and baby Dennis, that's usually how we refer to him as his attorney ad litem is Miss Melissa McClure. Other folks are here, but that's the lawyers and CASA. Last witness we had, Miss McDougall was on the stand, and Miss McClure was asking her questions. And Mr. Stevens, we anticipate that she will be our last
I
witness.
think we had just finished with you going through the Dyers in your observation of their visits. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so now let's just, because we're covering all the people that had a home study. So I'd like you to do the same exact thing for the Anderson home study.
Okay.
And their visits. We'll talk about the home study in a minute, but right now let's talk about the Andersons and their visits.
Okay. Both, and I don't remember all their last names, both Kathy and Linda visited at least 3 times, and they seemed to be genuinely pleased to be there with baby Dennis. They interacted with him more like grandparents would, I think, than potential parents. They were very excited to be there. There was a lot of music playing from their phones. They played Baby Shark almost every time, and he got really excited and would dance to that. They were not able to get down on the floor and play with him. They would sit in the smaller chairs and interact with him that way. And like I say, I didn't see a lot of teaching or necessarily interacting games, but they interacted with him concerning the toys that were there in the room and seemed to have a good time with him. That's about all I can say.
And as far as beginning to the end, I know it was only 3 visits, but was there any big difference between how they reacted at the beginning versus at the end?
I did not see a big difference in reactions.
Okay. And let's talk about the Parkers and their visits.
Okay. The Mr. Parker picked baby Dennis up on first walking through the room. He seemed to enjoy playing the old take the hat off, put the hat on type of game, that kind of interaction. They would talk with him. They would try and repeat words so he could learn words. Billy was more passive originally, would sit on the couch a lot and would interact if he came close. And in terms of movement, in about the 3 or 3.5 times I saw them, the last time Billy was down on the floor interacting with him, but she was a little over 45 minutes late, and I'm not sure why. An explanation may have been given to Raphael, who was on site, but I didn't know. And again, they enjoyed visiting with him, and I didn't see a whole lot of change.
Were there some visits that the Parkers and the Dyers shared?
Yes, the last visit that the Parkers had, simply because Billy was running late, Mr. Parker came in on time, and they just decided, or they asked permission if the Dyers could stay until Billy got there, and everybody agreed that that was fine. So they did share that last visit.
And did you notice any tensions between them during that visit?
No, they were very congenial. Got along well.
Okay. So we've talked about your observations. You were boots on the ground of the 4 different groups of people that visited. Now, what I'd like to ask you about is, after all you have heard in all these many, many hours of testimony, I would like you to go through and tell me for each one, I'll ask you one at a time, what do you see as the benefits, the pros, the things that would be good for baby Dennis with each family, and then what are the concerns you have? So let's start off with Abigail Moore.
I think the pros are that Abigail and Shane have a very well-established home. They have children. Abigail's total attention is focused on family and taking care of family, and I think that's a very positive thing for them. My concerns are the overall connection with the Price family, because it's been shared in many different ways that the family is an integral unit, and there's a lot of gathering together for holidays and family events and that kind of stuff. And I know that Mrs. Moore has said she would not, if the rules were that she was not to have interaction with the extended family, like with Nancy Price or Dennis or whatever, that she would follow that. And I can bet that she probably would. But ultimately, CPS is only going to be involved for so many years. And then at that point, then all of the interaction with the rest of the family could occur legally. And for the year or two that it doesn't, how does she let her 3 children interact with the family in a way that they're used to, but not have baby Dennis interact? Somebody's going to feel left out or something. And so that concerns me a lot. Another minor concern from the home study, and I don't know if we're talking home studies now, is that they have no health insurance. They are self-pay. And yet the home study indicated that they spend $800 a month on entertainment, which I have a hard time understanding. And it could be that baby Dennis will continue to need therapists or things for a while. And, my concern is they have no medical insurance.
Are you concerned about the protectiveness of the Moore family?
Well, like I said, I think that Abigail will do her best to prevent interaction if CPS is requiring that. But after that time, yes, I would be concerned about the interaction with the rest of the family, and the fact that it would be pretty much impossible for her to withdraw from that family unit. I don't think that that's going to be an option. And I think interaction with Nancy Price or with Dennis II would be problematic. I also have a little bit of concern over how invested all of this is, Mr. Moore, Sean Moore is, just viewing his limited interaction with the baby during visitations.
Okay. Now let's talk about the Dyers. Let's do the same thing with the Dyers.
Pros, I think they really want to raise Carrie's child. They're very concerned that he have the best there is to have. And I think they have concerns about how the other family, Price family, would interact with him. But the fact that they are here in Llano County, which is pretty close to where everything took place in terms of Carrie's death, I have to look out at what is the best interest of the child, not only today, but tomorrow and in the years to come. And, incidents that are as traumatic as what happened are public knowledge in this county. And I live in this county, so I hear people talking, and I worry about what's going to happen to him when he grows up and goes to school and gets, face to face with somebody who's throwing it in his face about what has happened. That's a concern for me.
Okay. Now let's talk about the Andersons.
I have major concerns about Kathy Anderson's health. In looking and researching some of the medications she's taking and looking at her diagnoses and at her age, I don't see her as being able to live until baby Dennis is 18 years old. And I don't want him to have to face the death of a second mother in his lifetime. The fact that her daughter did not approve of the placement of the baby in the house because I think of her mother's health situation, and the fact that we never heard from Linda's sons with any kind of reaction about why they should do that, why they should take the baby. Those are big major concerns for me.
Okay. And let's talk about the Parkers.
I think age is a factor with the Parkers as it is with Kathy and Linda. Mr. Parker's son Franklin really opposed their having the baby placed with them, but said he did not feel comfortable saying why, and that kind of raises a red flag for me. Their home is extremely, it's beyond cluttered. It was beyond that, and that is a big concern. And in the home study, Mrs. Parker said that finances were a concern to her, and she spends, according to the home study, a lot of money, like $400 a month on clothes, and like $700 between horse feed and food for the dogs. So with those kinds of expenses and with finances being a concern to her, I would think that in the long term, having expenses for the baby would be a concern also.
Okay. And did you have any pros for Billy and her husband?
I'm sorry, what?
Did you have any pros for Billy and her husband?
Oh, they love that baby a lot. Yeah.
So let's briefly talk about the family group conference, because you were a participant in that. What were some of the observations that you made during that family group conference?
One of the things that struck me the most was that Carrie came right out. I know it's been talked about that she really wanted Abigail for placement, but at that particular meeting, when none of the Price family was present, she said very clearly that she wanted Jamie to be the one to care for her child until she was able to get him back from CPS custody. And she said, I don't know if that's going to be possible because of James's, criminal history. And she expressed great worries that if her husband, Dennis, would be very upset and very angry if the baby was placed with Jamie or anybody on her side of the family instead of being placed with his sister. And she said that if he ever found out that the baby would be placed with her side of the family, that he would never have anything to do with her again. And that was very concerning to her because she was trying to reconcile and have their family be together.
based on all that you have observed and all that you have read in the home studies, do you believe that this child should be placed with either side of the family?
Both sides of the family love this child greatly. But I do not see how baby Dennis is going to be safe with the Price family. And I have worries about the safety of him with the Dyers because the Prices know where they live and have already harassed that family to a certain extent. And I think that would only continue if placement with the Dyers were to happen also. So I have concerns with both sides.
So of the 4 home studies we have, is there anyone in those home studies and the interveners that you would feel comfortable placing this child with today?
Not totally.
Is there any place that you can think of that this child should be placed?
He is doing very well with his placement in a foster home today. The family seems to be exceptionally qualified and capable of not only showing love to this child, they teach him, and I've observed them teaching him how to calm down or wait for a bottle. They've taught him how to move from sitting to standing, so he's more mobile. He has good interactions with their children. Is probably closest to the little girl in the family. They show great insight in how to help him, insight into what his issues are, and follow through with taking him to his therapist and working with him to overcome that. In fact, he is now to the point where he's been dismissed from both OT and PT.
So even though as part of our jobs, we try to look for family to be placement, is it your belief, based on all of the things that you have observed, that in this particular case, that the best placement and the safest placement for this child would be for him to stay where he currently is and possibly to be adopted by that family?
It is with a very heavy heart that I say this, because I know how important family is, but I believe his current placement is the best spot for him.
Is there anything else that you believe Judge Mabry needs to know? Okay, pass the witness, Judge.
Ms. McDougall, in speaking about Mr. Moore's time with baby Dennis, I think you shared he was there for 2 different visits. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So each of those visits lasted for how long?
Well, the visit started lasting for an hour and a half when the Andersons came in. Then they were 1-hour visits. And then when everybody was involved, then they switched to an every other week visit, and 2 hours at that point.
Okay. Did he come to any of the 2-hour visits?
No.
Okay. So was he there for the 1.5 hour long visits or the 1 hour?
Yes, he was there on January 20th and February 3rd, and those were 1.5 hour visits.
Okay. And you shared earlier for the first visit, the first 24 to 25 minutes, he did not interact with the baby. But after that, looking at both visits, roughly how much time did he really engage with baby Dennis?
Well, about half the time on the first visit. And on the second visit, he was more engaged. He and Kenyon would build up large wooden blocks, and as he's holding the baby, they let the baby knock the blocks down, that kind of thing. There was more interaction with the hat on and off and some of that. So I would say he was more engaged.
So we'll even say for the whole 1.5 hours then?
Pretty much, yes.
So for a total of 2 hours, correct? You know, half hour, well, maybe an hour on the first visit, I'm sorry. So 3 hours total. Okay.
About that.
Okay. And the other parties, your testimony earlier was well over how many hours? Like the Dyers, for instance, James coming to, I think all but one, and Jamie.
Yes, I think it was all but one, and he and Jamie both interacted equally, the whole time.
And was your testimony, it was over 20 hours that they visited? I'm trying to look at my notes. I apologize.
No, there were,
12 hours.
I observed 12 hours of, with the Dyers and 12 hours with the Moores. And there was one session that I was out of state and did not observe one visit.
Okay. Did Mr. Moore, did you get to talk with him some when he came for the visit?
I'm sorry, what?
Did you get to visit with him some? Did you actually speak
No,
with
I
him?
was observing the visits on Zoom. Generally, Raphael Tovar was there, although occasionally he had another worker setting things up.
Are you aware if Mr. Moore asked about feeding precautions or any of the guidelines that have been provided? Did he ask for clarification of any of that you're aware of?
I would not be aware of whatever he asked with the CPS worker as they entered. I would not be aware of that.
Okay. The Andersons were visiting. I know that you had some concerns that they weren't on the floor and all. Did they follow the therapist's recommendations, or was there any feeding that occurred during those visits?
There was some occasional feeding, and there were comments made of, boy, he sure is hungry. He eats a lot.
Okay. Were they instructed on the feeding precautions?
You would have to ask Raphael about that.
Okay. So when you observed the visits with Abigail and Shane, those 2 times he was there, and Cameron, did she follow the therapist's recommendations and suggestions for the proper way to feed the child?
As near as I could tell, it was difficult because of how she was sitting in front of the tray on the little feeding thing to know how many pieces she put out on the tray. The emphasis was just put a few pieces and make sure he picked them up and put them in his mouth and chewed them appropriately. As far as I know, she did.
Okay. And there was a comment about the bonding, like baby Dennis running and checking in with Jamie, Mr. and Mrs. Dyer. Did you see similar behavior between baby Dennis and Abigail or Shane?
I did not see the repeated going back and forth and bonding in that sense. He would go get a toy from her occasionally. He certainly did not avoid her, and she was not avoiding him.
No, with regards to the Dyers, you shared one pro, which was they definitely wanted to raise Carrie's baby and be that mom and dad. And your con was baby Dennis growing up in the Llano community. So you heard testimony today about a criminal trespass warning that has already been published and issued. Do you know what that is?
I do know what that is. I also know that people often violate that rule, and it's very difficult to enforce.
And they go to jail if they violate it. You understand that, right? Or they can. They could have a criminal offense charge filed. Okay. So the fact that the department was not able to approve their home study because of James's criminal history, is there anything that you didn't list that as a concern? Are you truly, your concern is them being close to the Price family?
I'm not as concerned about James's criminal history. He has been clean for a number of years now, and I have to base my observations on how I see him interacting also, and I was very impressed with how he interacted with the baby, and the baby tended to bond with him really well, and so that is not a concern of mine.
So as things go on, you're in if the court were to follow the recommendation for the current placement, the Dyers were not to live in this community and they were to move somewhere that the Prices don't know where they are. That would mitigate your concern. Is that correct?
That would mitigate a lot of my concern, yes.
So I'm just curious about Miss Billy Parker's home study and your interpretation of that. Did you visit with her directly about you shared a concern about her finances. Did you ever have a conversation with Miss Parker about what you read in the home study?
No, I did not.
Okay. And so you did read the home study, you noted that they reported an income of $6,460. Is that right?
I've read the home studies for each of the families.
Okay. So whenever you subtract what they spend and what they make, they have an excess of $2,811. Do you feel like that's an amount of money that people should be able to live on and be comfortable?
I was basing my concern on the fact that Mrs. Parker in the home study had mentioned that finances were a concern to her.
Okay, but you never did follow up and get clarification on what that meant to her. That could have a number
No, I
of
did
meanings to
not.
her, correct? Okay. All right, I pass the witness. Thank you, Mrs. McDougall.
I'm also confused about the lack of finances. My husband gets paid quite well. Our home is paid for. I don't remember expressing concerns about our finances of not being able to take care of another baby. We have good insurance. The baby can be.
Hold on, Miss Parker, you got to ask her a question.
Okay. Well, I guess she may have already answered it when she said she didn't really read the report on the finances or know why I was concerned. I was concerned my horses eat too much, really, but that's besides the point.
Okay,
No question, I guess.
thank you. Anybody else? People, I don't know all the money stuff that goes on behind the CPS scene, but people with approved home studies usually get subsidy or, foster placement funds, things like that from the department. Okay. And we have a couple of approved home studies and we have one unapproved home study. Are you concerned about the Dyer's finances with an unapproved home study being able to support baby Dennis?
No, I am not.
Okay. So money would not be an issue for them without.
I don't believe so.
Okay. Miss McDougall, so all these every single visit you observed, was it all done via Zoom or were any done in person?
All of the visitations that I observed were done by Zoom.
Okay. And I obviously haven't seen a Zoom visitation, but are you able to see the whole room, see everybody that's there? I mean, you get a good view?
You get a pretty good view. Occasionally somebody will set a sack up on top of the window, and until it's moved, it's kind of difficult to see. Or if someone is standing in front of the child, you're not able to see as well. For the most part, you can see pretty much throughout the whole room. You cannot see what toys are on the shelf beneath the window until the child pulls them out.
And you can hear though?
You can hear pretty well, yes.
Okay.
There was at least one study where the sound was not good. It was garbled.
Has Mr. Parker been to all of Mrs. Parker's visits?
Yes.
Okay. What about Mr. Dyer? Has he been to all Jamie's visits?
I think there was one visit that he was not present.
Okay. What about Canyon and the Moore children? Have they been at all the visits?
I think Kenyon was sick once. The rest of the visits he's been at. Miss Moore brought some of her children. I can't remember if it was 2 or 3. I think it was just 2. But she had misunderstood the directions that Mr. Tovar gave her, that he indicated that he really, because Kenyon was the half brother, he wanted Kenyon to be able to establish more of a relationship before the other kids began coming.
Okay. But for the Moore's visits, has it always been Abigail and one kid, whether it's her children or Canyon, or has there ever been one with just Abigail and maybe Mr. Moore by themselves?
I don't believe Canyon was there for the December 2nd visit, but Canyon was there pretty much thereafter.
Okay. Baby Dennis's birthday was January,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Ma'am.
What did everybody during their visits do for his birthday, if you can recall?
Abigail brought in toys and a bag, a big bag of toys and all that. She did take the toys with her when she left, but there was like that kind of celebration with Abigail.
Okay. Anybody else?
Not that I remember.
What about Christmas?
No, I don't remember that. That was on the 23rd that they met, and I don't remember that,
Okay.
the specifics of presents or anything.
Did anybody do Easter egg hunts around Easter or anything?
No, ma'am.
Oh, okay. Miss McDougall, have you been to the Dyer's home?
Yes, I have.
Okay. And you think it's okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Have you been to the Moore's home?
I have not. We had, because she's so far away in Huntsville, Miss McClure and myself, and I can't remember if Raphael or Kaylee were on that. We had an extensive Zoom meeting with her at her home.
But it's just because of the distance, no other reason, correct?
Correct.
You've been to the Anderson home,
I have not.
and they're the ones in County.
Mrs. McClure visited her. She's also out of town, and then also let us join by Zoom and showed us, pictures of the home, and we got to interview Kathy Anderson and Linda.
What about the Parker home? You been there?
I have not been to the Parker's home.
Okay. You been to the foster home?
Yes, several times.
Okay. Ms. McDougall, have you had any involvement since this case began with Nancy Price?
We, on about the same day that we visited by Zoom with Abigail Moore, we also had an interview with Miss Price. I think it was on the 20th of September.
Okay. Anything since that time?
The very first visit that Carrie had with the baby at the CPS office in Burnett, I went to also visit that day, and Carrie was visiting with Raphael to begin with, and another lady was in the office and was looking for a phone charger, and I happened to say, "Are you Mrs. Price?" And she said yes. And so I moved over and introduced myself and visited with her that first day. And then we visited with her on Zoom on the same day we had the 20th with Abigail. And she was also present at the family group conference for Dennis Price.
Okay. Any involvement since, let's say, end of September with Miss Price, Nancy Price?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Have you had any involvement with Dennis, the father?
Yes. My supervisor, Kaylee Williman, and I had an interview with him when he was in the Llano County Jail, and that was by Zoom also.
Okay. Did you ever see him at any visitation with baby Dennis before he went to jail?
No, he never came to a visitation before that time. I think he was expected to be at one, but for some reason wasn't there. I don't know if it was a job conflict or what. And thereafter, he had difficulty qualifying because of his drug testing.
Okay.
They were planning on having a visitation on, I believe, the 4th of October with Canyon. It was going to be Canyon's birthday, and they had planned on visiting with the baby that day also, but that got canceled.
Have you had any discussions with just you and Canyon?
I have not. No.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Anybody else have any questions?
The
No.
new judge. Oh,
Yeah.
I need a couple of redirects, Your Honor.
Okay.
Ms. McDougall, going back to looking at baby Dennis's birthday, is there a chance that you missed any of the visits? Have you been to every single one of the visits the family members have come to?
No, I indicated earlier that I missed the visit on, well, I may not have told you the date. I missed the visit on the 31st of March.
Okay, so you don't recall the Dyers bringing a strawberry cake, a fruit-shaped cake made with strawberries and gifts and singing happy birthday to baby Dennis?
I do not, but there was one visit that I was having difficulty and logged in late, and that could have been that visit.
Okay, and they could have brought presents and left them for him to take home with them, and you wouldn't have known.
They could have been, and I would not have known.
Okay, and your testimony earlier is you don't remember about Christmas, so they very easily could have taken Christmas presents. You just don't know it, right?
I was there for the whole visit on the 23rd, and I can go back and look at my notes, but off the top of my head, I can't remember.
That's okay. Thank you, Ms. McDougall.
I mean, I'll just ask real quick too. I tried to hold true to my word, but I was asking questions.
But we're obviously kind of going on, so that's okay.
Okay, well then I'll ask a couple then. But regarding Christmas gifts, I mean, same situation. You're not 100% sure that Abigail Moore didn't send any Christmas gifts, are
I am
you?
not 100% sure. I could go back and check my notes, but from memory, I don't have that information.
Okay. And so if she said she did, do you have any reason to doubt her?
No.
Okay. You know what? I will just go ahead and pass the witness, Judge.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Davis. Anybody else? Mr. Rogers, you get to go first.
Thank you, Your Honor. I will try to be brief in the interest of time. It's been a long hearing. I'm not going to recap or recount the evidence. The court's heard everything. Just want to give the department's rationale at this point. At the moment, CPS is seeking the termination of Dennis Price's parental rights. Given the criminal allegations against him and Carrie Price's tragic death, the department doesn't believe that ultimate placement or custody by a member of Mr. Price's family is appropriate, even though Mrs. Moore has passed a home study. Frankly, as you've heard, I think there's great reason to be concerned about the Price family's pattern of circling the wagons. We're very concerned about protectiveness by every member of the Price family regarding any court orders that would prevent contact with Dennis Price and or Nancy Price. And that concern is extremely heightened because Dennis Price is currently out on bail. So in the absence of approved home studies other than Abigail Moore's, and given our concerns about protectiveness, at this point, I think the department would prefer to keep the child in foster care until trial. And I believe that that is in the best interest of the child, rather than having the child possibly bond with the Price family, have Mr. Price's rights be terminated and have custody go to either another family member or to an adoptive placement. Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Connolly.
Judge, I'll also be brief. As the court is well aware, I haven't been here throughout this entire hearing. I understand that you've been patient and diligent and listened to all the parties and all the evidence. And first off, we want to thank you for your patience in this process. It goes without saying that there's a very strong preference from Mr. Price's behalf that the child is placed with his sister. She has shown that she is a very capable, loving mother, a family member, and I would just submit that this case is about her and her home and her relationship with baby Dennis, not about the entirety of the family. That's a separate matter that we'll talk about. But for the purposes today, she's shown that she is an excellent candidate to take care of this child. And I would submit far better than any of the other options. And so we would request that baby Dennis be placed with Miss Moore.
Judge, and I too don't want to go into a lot of what has been heard. The court's heard a lot, but we really didn't come into this wanting to make it a Price against the Dyers or the Parkers. What we were wanting to do is just, we were hoping we could cut through it and just everybody focus on where was the best placement for baby Dennis, considering the options. And at the time, there were only 2 approved home studies, and that was Abigail Moore's and the Andersons. And it kind of, and we had hoped that other, I can understand the parties throwing it back and forth at each other. There's a lot of emotion here. But, we were hoping that some of the other players could help weed through that, namely the department. CASA, I did appreciate the statements that were just made and certainly others that could have asked questions. When I asked Mr. Tovar, if the court remembers, after looking at all the home studies, who did the department want? He said the Andersons. And it wasn't until that happened that we had to ask all these other hard questions. And in fact, of all the people, Mr. Tovar really kind of put Abigail Moore at the bottom. He basically was forced to have to say, well, I guess since the Dyers aren't approved and, we couldn't really approve the Parkers, I guess I have to go with Abigail Moore. And I'm concerned, I'm in this late, I got in it in February, but I'm concerned that, I think we can all agree that what's happened to Carrie and her side of the family is quite tragic. You've heard from my client; she's extremely sad. She's got a sister-in-law that's she's lost. She's lost now, probably going to lose a brother in this situation too. And family's been all torn apart. And then we've got a child in the mix too that may or may not be getting to know his siblings and things like that. And there's a lot of stuff having to go back and forth when really the hope should have just been on what can we do that's in the best snapshot for baby Dennis right now. And these, you heard about the Andersons. I mean, Mr. Tovar didn't come right out with it. I had to actually pin him down. Health problems. She's got a host of health problems. Both those aunts have been through a bunch of trauma. No one called them back. Actually, that's not true. Her own daughter called back and said, don't place with them. But their other references did not. She even that was the same daughter that the aunt claimed she was tricked into signing her rights away on. But none of that was a concern to the department. That was their prime placement, even though you've heard CASA. I really think the comments from CASA's observations that, they are not fit. And it's not I'm not trying to pick on these placements options. I was hoping that others would kind of cut through that. We wouldn't have to do that. But health-wise, there are some major concerns. The Parkers, again, Mr. Tovar, well, there's a little bit of clutter. No, it was a lot of clutter. Okay. It's a lot of things were going on there. And I don't need to go into a lot of it, but I felt like I was the only one that was picking up on things. I think there's a lot of effort being made to rehabilitate or even overlook bad facts in these home studies. And a lot of the stuff I brought up was right there for everybody to see. For instance, nobody mentioned a thing about the broken wrist of Miss Parker. I mean, she got a broken wrist. It's in the reports on page 7 from her husband, accidentally turning her around. And it was just a misunderstanding. He was arrested, charges later dropped. You heard Laura today say, I really don't know. And there's all this kind of stuff going on. And then Franklin Parker for the Parkers even called and said, don't place with them. Okay. But you didn't hear that from the department. You didn't hear it from anybody else. We had to bring that up. Moving along to the Dyers. Look, the Dyers have all sorts of concerns with their home study. There's lots of concerns with inconsistent statements that were brought up. You heard Jamie. You can't get a straight answer really out of Jamie without it being qualified, even on simple things that you should remember or big events that you should remember. Jamie wants to only focus on her relationship with her family now, which is great, but that's not been the history. But yet that's what they tried to report to everybody. We've got a great relationship. We depend on each other. That's not true. You heard from Laura today. Both of them have kind of been on their own. Carrie did not have a great relationship with her family. And she's only wanted Jamie right after, nobody keeps mentioning the timing, but right after Dennis filed for divorce. That's a key piece because other than that, everything with Abigail Moore, it wasn't that she wanted her side all along. You've seen text messages where her and Jamie, they have a strained relationship. Talking about Mr. Dyer. Mr. Dyer, there are all sorts of questions that surround the now whitewashed death of his first wife. There's a lot of circumstances, and the only two witnesses to that crime were, of course, his mother and father. Mr. Dyer is forgetful. He forgot he had, I think it's 2 half brothers and a sister that I had to figure out. Nobody else brought that up. And he left them out, most likely, I would imagine. I mean, Carrie's the half sister to Jamie and Laura. I think we all understood that half siblings were something to be considered. He didn't want them mentioned. And there's reasons for that, most likely having to do with circumstances surrounding how he was with his own family. And it would contradict his statements about abuse and things like that in his history. I feel that there are certainly some double standards being used when it comes to Abigail Moore. She got beat up pretty good over not knowing about Dennis the way he was and what Carrie was going through. But then when we heard the Parkers and the Dyers, they had other things going on here in Llano County, and they're right in the thick of it. But yet, even James Dyer, I don't know, I really kind of kept out of that. And he was given a pass for that. But Abigail Moore, 3 hours away, was supposed to know all these things. And again, the Dyers all claim they had the same type close-knit family, but they got a pass on not intervening, not doing anything. Nobody reported Laura on Wesley. Nobody did anything to help that child, and they should have known. None of them did anything. Abigail Moore, I mean, she's got a lot more going for her than just, they have resources and things like that. I thought CASA did mention on some good things. She's a dedicated mom. They have the ability. She's full-time. She's got her own young kiddos that she's raising. She's involved in the community, school, and extracurriculars. And she'll get the child church. She'll get the child in the same routine. She has no problem taking on this child right now. In fact, wants to do it and is happy to do it. She's physically able to do it real easily to get in it. The big concern, she's got an extensive support system, not price support system. She's in Huntsville, and she has a whole host of people that can help out, namely her husband's family, which I understand Shane's now kind of getting brought into the forefront of this with not coming to a couple of visits. But, Shane was trying to kind of, leave this to the court to decide. And he's going to work, and he's there to be supportive. But he was there last time. Anybody could ask questions to him. Nobody seemed to want to. So regarding, and they could have asked me to have him here. We would have had him here. Regarding, and Abigail Moore, let's not forget. I mean, I understand the desire. I take what Ms. McDougall said. I understand her point. But one that the child being in Llano is difficult for a variety of reasons. Abigail Moore is removed from that situation. And by all accounts from all the witnesses, none of them really knew Abigail or had met her. The only witness that knew Abigail was Heather, who she hadn't talked to for 10 years, basically. And Heather is far from a unbiased witness. She can't remember things that are convenient for her. Oh, I got tricked and she got tricked as well, I guess. And I didn't check on my child's status for 8 years. It wasn't until after she had another child, got remarried. Nobody wants to have to admit to how they were in the old days, why they may have lost a child. So I understand her theme and motive with her arguments today, but she doesn't know anything about Abigail Moore. She does, well, since for at least 10 years, she doesn't know if Abigail is going to just follow whatever Nancy says. You've been here to actually listen to Abigail and judge for yourself her own credibility. She says if she will keep this child away from anybody, she'll call the police on them. She did, I thought, gave a very honest answer. I hope that my family loves me enough to not put me in that situation because I'll do it. So, and then she is the only one that it seems that can facilitate the relationship with Canyon and even Wesley to an extent. I mean, she's the only bridge to this baby's brothers, really, and she can do it without drama. And she's been removed from all this. There's not one bad thing really to say about Abigail Moore, but except for, oh, you should have known. Well, I mean, there were a lot of people that I guess should have known some stuff that were right in the thick of it. But in Seabrook is 2 hours away roughly from Abigail Moore in Huntsville. So the concerns, I understand the concerns, but I also think that there's been some things that have been said to mitigate those concerns. And I do hope the court will consider this in placing the child. The child will need to be around family, brothers. And I do honestly think even after the smoke clears on some of this, Abigail Moore probably is the only one that could bridge a gap with the Dyers and the Parkers. I really do. With that, Your Honor, I'd rest.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Ms. Lang?
Thank you, Your Honor. So, Your Honor, in this placement hearing for the hearing now today, looking at the best interest of the children and the court, originally having to look at the home studies and the department as well, you heard testimony from the state, from Rafael Tovar, that the only reason the Dyer's home study was not approved was because of the past criminal history on James Dyer. They even went and appealed. He and his supervisor and the other regional director appealed it higher in the levels, but based on policy at the department, they could not approve it. But for that, they would have had an approved home study. The two other things, Mr. Nicholas in his closing said there were a number of concerns with the home study. There were only two that were not addressed. The gate to the lake, that had been mitigated, and pet vaccinations. And I believe the testimony is that it could have been done and Rafael had not gone back to verify it. So that being the only reason the department couldn't have recommended. Rafael Tovar went on to say that the Dyers, their family, it was admirable how the maternal family had rallied around this child with the love and concern and passion to be primary individuals in his life. They acted appropriately and they had the preferential interactions with baby Dennis during the visits. He even said the Dyers are phenomenal and they have grown with Dennis. CASA even talked about the bonding that's occurred between really more James, grandpa, but also both grandparents, aunt and uncle, Jamie and James. All of the allegations that were presented through Mr. Davis on behalf of Mrs. Moore were allegations about chaos and instability in the Dyer household and in Carrie Price's family. Just allegations. A lot of what you heard was a lawyer testifying. Not a ton of evidence came in to support the questions he asked and to validate or dismiss the responses he got from any of the other witnesses he was questioned. When they denied, they didn't know. That's not how it was. But there was no evidence proffered to support what the counsel had provided. There was no evidence about abuse from John Parker. You heard from both of his daughters. Carrie's not here to talk now. He did not physically abuse those children. There was no eviction that occurred. Jamie testified she put up a no trespassing sign and Carrie abandoned property she was being allowed to stay in. And Jamie and her husband were concerned about maintaining the integrity and safety, the continuity of that property. They were accused of abandoning Carrie in her time of crisis. Judge, you heard testimony about them finding her in fields and picking her up and law enforcement dropping Carrie off at Laura's house and walking up to Laura's house and knocking on the door frequently twice in a week prior to the time of her death, over and over again during the course of the time of the relationship with Dennis. They were there. They got frustrated. You heard testimony talking about how frustrating it is trying to support and love somebody who's a victim of family violence and encourage her to get help and leave that environment, and her choosing not to go. They didn't abandon her. The Prices isolated her. You heard testimony, how they took telephones away from her, how Dennis broke a phone, how Billy had to replace a phone for her. She would show up and borrow James's telephone to be able to communicate. We had questions about who had control of the electronic devices. There was testimony that passwords were shared, access was given. Who knew who was talking to whom on what device at a given time? You heard language. I believe Ms. Moore testified that Carrie had said that her family was volatile, aggressive, and vindictive. What you heard was evidence of the Price family being those things. Rafael Tovar testified at one of the family meetings that the Prices came at the department. That seems pretty aggressive. You heard the violence that Carrie endured. You saw photographs, Your Honor, of the injuries she had walking from the Price compound up to the bank, going into her sister's home, and her sister taking the photographs. She recanted stories to both of her sisters of the violence she endured. You also heard testimony from a very unbiased party, Ms. Janlyn Lovelady from the bank. She talked about the conduct of Nancy and Terry, Nancy's daughter, and then her daughter, Kylie, I believe is her name. Talk about being volatile and aggressive and vindictive. The way they acted toward the personnel at the bank, how Ms. Lovelady expressed her concern, even went to try to get some form of protective order or a criminal trespass warning. You also heard her testify that Nancy referred to baby Dennis as her baby, which was alarming to this total stranger who's talking about an infant that belongs to one of her employees' siblings. You heard accusations that Miss Billy Parker was a drug dealer. She took drugs to her daughter. Well, you know, Laura put it out there. This family came, Judge. They showed up in court. You got to see the good, the bad, and the ugly. You have a man who he suffered the consequences of an accidental death of his wife, which is what his conviction was. You heard a woman who's gone to prison for assaulting a peace officer with a long history of drug abuse, because they wanted to come and let you hear the truth from them, not what's been interpreted and biased by whatever dialogue happened from a woman who's extremely distraught. Carrie was under, based on the testimony we've heard, extreme anguish in the violent relationship and environment she was in. Laura said her mother did not buy her drugs. She loved her daughter. She tried to go and take care of her. She had a lot of empathy for her daughter. And Jamie sat back as the big sister, and she told you kind of the mother hen of the family. And she was concerned about enabling, and she tried to get her sister good help. But that was a family dynamic, Your Honor. It's not abandoning anybody. It's setting boundaries and having expectations and trying to do tough love, if you will. How do you handle those situations? One can only imagine unless you're in their shoes. You heard testimony that Billy Parker wasn't invited to a baby shower. She had COVID fear. Her testimony was provided that it wasn't that the family was distracted or not connected. It was simply she didn't want to go and be in that type of an environment. You heard testimony that Jamie wasn't, Carrie didn't really think about Jamie taking custody or having placement until Dennis had filed for the divorce. Judge, you heard testimony that this child, even Abigail said that she was kind of panicked, worried about this child going into foster care. So Dennis had, even prior to all this, reached out to Heather. We have an email that's been provided into, or electronic communication that's been offered into evidence between Dennis Price and the mother of Canyon. Would you take my baby? And then you have Carrie reaching out to Jamie like, well, being sassy with her. What's going on? Why aren't you asking for a home study? Well, Jamie explained, Your Honor, why she hadn't stepped forward. She didn't have an attorney. She didn't understand the process. It wasn't that she didn't want to help and be the placement and be that person to take the baby. She showed up at every family group conference. She's been to every visit that's available for that child. You heard Mr. Davis indicate that perhaps the Dyers are going to be homeless if they wind up if James retires and quits working at the ranch. Well, that's once again a misstatement, taking information and trying to sway the court from the truth. And they're not homeless, Judge. They have insurance. They don't pay as you go. If there's a major medical need for this child, they have insurance coverage to handle it. They were able to explain the inconsistencies in the home study. You know, we talked about how soon after the time her sister Jamie and James's sister-in-law and her sister had passed away, and the home study individuals come and do their interview. It's a pretty stressful and distressing time. So they were able to listen to the questions, review what was answered and provide the accurate information or clarify any small points of contention. Mr. Dyer doesn't have a relationship with those half siblings. Nobody explained to him, tell me about your half siblings and full siblings. In his world, they're not blood kin, but they still get along. Did anybody bring them in and have them testify about the type of relationship that they have? You got to meet the Dyers. You got to meet Laura Henderson, Your Honor. You heard from people who've been around this family a long time, Miss Heather Schultz, and hear that interaction and what it was like to try to co-parent or be a part of a child's life. She was young, had no idea what she was getting into and what she was signing off on whenever she signed that paper. And you even heard Abigail say, she didn't deny it was her signature. She did say that she wasn't there though. So somebody signed it. Miss Heather said she did not ask Miss Abigail to sign that document. You heard the testimony from the sisters of poor deceased Carrie about that family and truly got the vision of a true family with ups and downs and relationships, but they loved each other and it was authentic and they didn't hide anything from one another. But you didn't really get to meet the Price family, Your Honor, over the past 4 days. None of the siblings showed up. Shane showed up one time, or Sean, the husband, showed up one time, Mr. Moore. And Miss Abigail Moore looks really, really good on paper. But I'm going to ask you to consider the testimony and the evidence that you've been given over the past 3.5 days. The testimony that we've heard from Miss Moore has been all about protecting and defending the family. That family that she has said several times she's very proud to be a member of and very close to. That family that texts each other every day to share information. But it's interesting, Your Honor, you have to ask, if they're going to talk to each other every day and hold each other up, wouldn't you tell your daughter that you're going to get your inheritance early? Hey, be looking in the mail for these deeds. But Miss Moore testified she didn't have a clue that her mother had signed over, I think, 2 to 3 properties to her within days of Carrie's death. She testified she had no idea. She was naive, was the term she used, why she didn't realize that would be an issue. And Your Honor, you got to meet Mr. James Dyer, and you got to see him as a man and a grandfather in his role and what he's done through his life, but you didn't get to meet Shane Moore, the other individual who's would be a significant factor in baby Dennis's life if he's placed with Abigail Moore. I think they co-parent. I think they have children together has been the testimony, but we don't know anything about him and how he would be as a father and a father figure. All we have in front of you is the home study. You have some electronic messages that came from Carrie, who's not here to testify. You've had authentic, true, firsthand knowledge from Jamie Dyer and James Dyer, the witnesses we brought to you. But you also have photographs from Abigail Moore of the baby whenever he was in the care of Nancy, primarily back before the actual removal. She showed pictures from when she's had interactions. She was establishing that relationship. And she's holding a child that's overweight and has developmental delays, which has been testified to, and smiling, and that she was part of his life then. Lots of minimization of the different things that were brought forward. Dennis's parents were at both of the family conferences, and you heard testimony from Brandy Roundtree that talked about how Carrie took ownership. Carrie was aware. Carrie wanted to do things to try to get everything back on track or resolve issues. She was taking ownership. That didn't happen from the Price side of the family. In fact, Mr. Price's father, he was, Dennis was considered to be the dad, looking for the Dad of the Year award at that point in time. No responsibility, minimization. You heard testimony that, once again, trying to distance herself, that I believe Miss Abigail said that she only saw Dennis and Carrie together roughly 3 times when they were together. But you heard testimony earlier in the course of the hearings where she spent a lot of time. They went to the lake, to the river, tons with Wesley. She saw Canyon a lot, and that they came to the Kingsland for the holidays and family events. So I have to wonder how much they were really around each other off and on. Minimization about dropping a child on his head and calling it horseplay with his father. Minimization about denying that an aggravated assault happened to one of her friends. She was a cheerleader friend of hers. At first, when she was asked about it, totally denied that she knew that Nicole Boyd had been assaulted by Dennis, who she had been married to. Totally denied it. But then when we came back around, oh yeah, I knew about it, but that's not how it was because Nicole didn't tell it to me that way. But Dennis went to jail, to prison on that ultimately. She denied knowing Dennis's long history of drinking and drug problems. Dennis has a history of being in and out of a rehab, multiple arrests, but once again, minimization, Judge. Whenever she was given feedback and heard the testimony about from Raphael with his direct observation in the watching the visits about the therapist recommendations, how to interact, hovering, you didn't hear testimony or anything come back where Ms. Moore said, wow, thank you for your feedback. I'm humble. I don't understand where that came from. What you heard was defensiveness and protectiveness, coming back to defend and say, that's not how it was. We did it right. You heard minimization about, they argue over there, although there's testimony about multiple telephone calls to law enforcement that didn't get talked about in those daily text messages, but that was just arguing. That was the terminology that was used. It's interesting that she doesn't have the tight relationship, but she's the one that her mother transferred the property to. And her other sister, Terry, her children got some. But Rebecca and Marshall didn't get any property. You didn't hear anything about Marshall and his wife. She didn't even say that she gave him a phone call whenever Carrie died or Dennis was arrested. No condolences from any of the family that showed up in court. The only one is Marshall and his wife. You heard testimony from Heather saying that Nancy told her that Abigail knows this stuff. You need to talk to Abigail. She's the one with the information. There was violence. There were broken fingers. There were marks on faces. We have a question about integrity, Judge, about how much of the truth do we want to own? How much do we need to dilute it to make it fit, to protect and defend the family posture? On the home study, CPS didn't interview Terry or Marshall. In the home study, you actually found this, Judge. You asked the question that I think you found it on page 5, that Miss Abigail said she wanted to protect the baby. And she also testified that she wanted to protect the baby. But whenever we had testimony in the last hearing about Dennis getting out on bond, and I think everybody in the courtroom had a concern, there were conditions of bond. Abigail's comment was that she was so upset because she was concerned she wouldn't get her visits. She didn't say, I'm so upset because I'm concerned about the conduct of my brother and I'm afraid for that little boy's safety. She goes, I'm so upset because I'm concerned I won't get my visits. Judge, you've heard a lot of testimony about concern with protectiveness. We have a very strong matriarch. Nancy calls the shots in this family. You've heard testimony from people who've been around her. You've seen her conduct at the bank. You've heard Abigail say she's naive. So if Nancy's calling the shots and Abigail's naive, I wonder how easy it's going to be for Abigail Moore to be protective. You heard the testimony about how the dynamic world that Canyon has grown up in with this on again, off again, you can talk to him, you can't talk to him. And you heard Heather talk the testimony that she just has to comply. She did sign those papers. She can't deny it. It happened. It's legal. But she would do anything to have a relationship with her son. She testified to that. But this family doesn't make that a priority. She's had testimony. She's stable, has a family, has a solid job, married. None of that is accommodated for in the best interest of Cameron to help build a healthy relationship with him. It's all about what Nancy wants, and the family then follows in that course. Respecting other people, not breastfeeding somebody's child without permission, being concerned whenever somebody dies, sending condolences to that party. Judge, I know you have to look at the best interest of this child, and that's actually required in our Texas Department of Family and Protective Services Placement Process Resource Guide, and the department testified they're familiar with that. We have to look at the caregiver's commitment to maintaining sibling contact, and the court is definitely going to look at every option, taking in light the best interest of the child with the feedback from the attorney ad litem and CASA and the department. Well, the department would recommend the baby Dennis go with James and Jamie Dyer, but for that home study. That's the only reason. Ms. McDougall says same thing. She doesn't feel comfortable with them living in Llano County, though. It'd be better if they lived in another community. Well, trespass warning is in place, Your Honor. The Dyers have their insurance. They bonded with the baby tremendously with high accolades from people who've been observing them together. They're not going to raise baby Dennis the way Canyon has been raised. And they are going to be able to foster relationships. They've testified they'd be open to have any type of relationship with the extended family that is in the best interest of this child or required by the court. Your Honor, I had provided to the court some case law, and I've already emailed it over to the parties. And this is going to be a memorandum opinion from the 5th District, the Court of Appeals in the 5th District of Texas in Dallas County, in Dallas. And I'm going to ask the court to just review that. I've shared it with the parties as well. And its cause number, it's actually number 05-19-01333CV in the interest of J.A. and N.A. children. Your Honor, in this case, what happened is there was a man who had a 21-year-old prior history of illegal sexual contact with a 14-year-old. He was 21 years old at the time of the incident. The victim was 14. The incident happened in 1998. So he was convicted and he had to become a registered sex offender after that incident. So years passed, 21 years passed. He had an encounter with a woman. She got pregnant. She winds up in jail on an offense and has a baby. The state, he doesn't know, they were just casually hooking up, I guess, as they would say. So the baby is his by DNA. The state went in and they could not approve his home study only because of that, him being a registered sex offender. That was the only reason. And this man at this point had been many years, not a severe criminal history. He was a barber. He tested positive for marijuana. He'd had a DWLI charge, a possession of marijuana charge. And he actually even had a failure to register charge in the course of that 21 years. But the department's basis was because of the per se rule about the policy with the prior history. This case went to the 5th Court of Appeals, 5th District of Texas, and it got sent back, Your Honor. And that baby went home with the biological father because they said that this is an ancient offense. The date of the offense was 21 years prior. I'm telling you, I'm offering this, Judge, because there's case law to support the court to review this as an ancient offense. James's offense was 30 years ago. He hasn't been arrested for marijuana. He hasn't had a DWLI. He hasn't been arrested on possession of marijuana. He's not a registered sex offender. The judge can consider in earnest the department wanted to be able to recommend it. They just cannot. And there's case law to support the court's decision to allow this the Dyers to be considered as the placement in the best interest of the child, baby Dennis, at this time. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. Ms. Parker, anything you'd like to add? No? Okay, thank you. Ms. McClure?
Judge, I have had many hearings with you since I have been in your sandbox, and I will tell you, of all the hearings I have ever had with you, this is the one I really would not want to be you. I feel like we've just watched a death match for paintball tournament and everybody is covered in paint. And there is nobody that is clean. There is nobody that has gotten out of this unscathed. So many times when we have competing families, we're thrilled with that because they're all pretty good. We're just looking for the best. I feel like in this case, we're being told we must choose family, even if it's the least of the not bad, or the least of the worst. I feel so sorry for everybody in Carrie's family. I cannot imagine what they have been through and what they're going to continue to go through. And so I really want to say that none of us, Raphael, Nancy, Kaylee, myself, none of us discussed this lightly. But Judge, after all of the hours we have heard, the many, many, almost unending hours, what it comes down to is, yes, we try to place with family, but in this case, today, in this placement hearing, this child deserves to be in a place that we know he is safe and loved and protected and will get the care he needs. We're not saying that there's never going to be any other option and that there's never going to be family that we might be able to consider. But today, we have questions. We have a lot of questions about the Moore family. I think that one of the things I've come away with is that there is a hierarchy. There is asset protection. They have an asset protection plan, and the asset they protect is Dennis Price II at all costs. If he harms a child, they will not call CPS because he must be protected. And even Abigail, who was there, did not call CPS. She did not do anything to protect that child. If she would not protect Canyon, why would we assume she would protect this child? I believe that Abigail is either complicit with her mother in fraudulent and possibly criminal activity, or she's too naive to see it and recognize it for what it is. And again, that is a placement concern. We need somebody that we can trust to be on the lookout to make sure that things are kept safe for this child. And she's not going to be able to do that. If her mother sends her something, she's just going to do whatever her mother tells her. That's the history. The best indicator of future behavior is past, and that's the past behavior we have with the Price family. Again, the Dyers, I do feel sorry for them. And again, this is not necessarily the way this case is going to end, but right now there's too much drama, not because of the Dyers, but the way I put it was, if you place this child with the Dyers right now, there will be no peace at the Dyer home. And if you place this child with the Price family, there will be no safety for that child. I believe that right now, today, the safest option for this child is to stay right where he is. We can talk about if the court wants to continue having visits. Our team has always worked hard to do whatever you've asked us to do. And if you ask us to find a way to safely continue visits, we will find a way to do that. But I would ask for this court to, the way we put it into our discussions is, regardless of family today, we have to make a recommendation based on the facts that we have seen from before this hearing and in this hearing. And based on those, we believe that the safest thing for him right now is to stay where he is. I think that with some time, things might shake out where we have a more clearly defined path. But I would ask this court to please keep him where he is. If the court is inclined to do so, I would ask that the court order a child's daycare. We're having some daycare issues. So I'd ask the judge to order daycare so that we don't have that as a continuing problem. Judge, this child is a vulnerable child, and he needs to be kept safe and protected, sometimes from family. Sometimes family is a problem. And I believe that right now he needs to stay where he is and be kept as safe as possible, pending further developments in this case.
Okay, thank you. Okay, y'all, I have a couple of questions. What are, and Mr. Rogers, you can help me here. What are Mr. Dennis Price's bond
My
conditions?
recollection is that he's to have no contact with victim's family, that he has stay away orders in place. I think he has both a scram device and an ankle monitor, which is quite unusual. I guess my only concern with the bond conditions is that my understanding is that there's not much of a geographic limitation on them. And I'm not quite sure where he's currently residing, but his ability to move freely is, I think, one of the concerns, particularly with regard to visitation.
Go through, if you want me to stop on any, he's got to report, do drug testing. That's the basic. Gain employment, scram, and no arrest or breaking any laws. Electronic ankle monitor, $40 a month plus a $2 fee for each transaction for bond supervision. Go to the district court, be subjected to a curfew, and then there's some more that were added. Let me go back over here. Defendant is prohibited from having any contact with the victim's family. The defendant shall not have contact with Dennis Price III without permission from the court. And then you, Judge, you published your order regarding visitation and protection. That came from your court on April 28th. Do you remember those terms, or you need to read it again?
No, I have those. I know what they are.
Okay. That's all. That's what I have, Judge.
Okay, Mr. Conley, you might know, does Mr. Price have he has that ankle monitor. I mean, that just monitors where you go. Can he leave the house? Yeah, what do you call that? Home detention. I don't think that's the right word, but I mean, where can he go? Where can he not go?
I think he's under, to the best of my knowledge, I've seen the ankle monitor, it's GPS location. And so I believe he is at all times, the state knows exactly where he's located. I don't want to misspeak, but I don't believe that there is a house arrest bubble that he cannot exit from. But his location is always known at all times.
Okay. That bond condition says he's subject to a curfew, but it didn't say what the curfew is. I mean, do you know what I'm so, everybody's subject to curfew. You know what the times are?
I do not, but sometimes I see that that's as soon as it gets dark outside.
But, if you're out at 2:00 in the morning and you don't have it written down, then you're not, subject to any sort of contempt, or you're not in violation,
Right. It seems like Mr. Price is indicating, is it from 6 to 6? 6 to 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., Judge,
every day.
every day.
Okay. Scrams for alcohol. I put the drug patch on. And Mr. Price did the authorization for Mr. Tovar to be able to talk to probation department. Mr. Tovar, have you talked to probation about the bond conditions? Everything going well? Do you have any updates?
I do not have any updates, but to my knowledge, everything has been going well at this time.
Okay. Is Mr. Price doing anything on a service plan? Has he contacted you about anything about a service plan?
No, Your Honor, he has not contacted me for anything on the service plan.
Okay. I mean, I asked because we started this hearing when he was in jail, and, things have changed a little bit now that he's out of jail. Ms. McClure?
But Judge, if you'll remember, we put in one of those orders that the CASA and CPS were only to go through his attorneys, so they would not have been directly in communication with him.
Okay. Other than my order, does Nancy Price have any kind of restrictions in her bond? Does anybody know?
I'm not seeing anything on her, Judge.
We can discover that and send it to the parties in court, Your Honor.
Okay. So remind me, before Mr. Price got out of jail, we were doing visits at the CPS office over there, right? They were at the CPS office, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
And remind me again when and how often they were.
At the end, they were every week on Friday from, I think they started at 9 and went till 1. And some people would visit that week, and then different people would visit the next week.
And we didn't have any special visits for holidays or anything like that, right?
No, they just accommodated. And if it was close to 1, they did whatever they wanted to do.
And I don't recall having any phone access or anything like that, right?
No.
No
He's
Zoom,
too
no,
old for that.
okay, nothing like that. Okay. Mr. Conley, do you know where Mr. Price is living? Is he living in Kingsland or is he living in Seabrook?
Judge, I think he's in Kingsland.
Okay.
Your Honor, he has requested to be transferred to Seabrook, but there's been no action on that.
Okay. Okay, y'all. This is our fourth hearing on this? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes. I read the home studies obviously before we started. I read them again after the first or the second hearing. I can't remember. And today we finally finished with all the testimony, and I will go back and read the home studies again. I'm not going to issue a ruling right now. But I promise y'all don't have any weekend plans. So I'm going to work this weekend. So I will send all the lawyers, and I don't think I have Ms. Parker's email address, but if somebody gets it, y'all can refer it to Ms. Parker once I issue a ruling via email. Mr. Price, I assume, I don't know if you have a service plan or not, but if you do, you have to comply. Your parental rights can be subject to termination. One thing we need to talk about, y'all, really two things, is I talked about this at the beginning of the hearing today. I'm set with y'all for trial on 8/9. That's also Advanced Family Law Week, so that kind of interferes with quite a few of us. But there is the objection to me. I know people object to me not on a regular basis, but it does happen, and that's discussed. It usually gets bumped out or revoked or whatever at mediation. So I have to talk to y'all about mediation because, since there is an objection to me, y'all know the district judges would require everybody to go to mediation. My personal opinion is it's a little premature, or my personal opinion also is I'm not sure this case would be successful at mediation. I don't know. What do you lawyers, what do y'all think?
Yeah, I couldn't see a mediation necessarily being successful unless we knew what was going to happen long term with Mr. Price, and I don't think we will by the time we'd have to do a mediation.
Judge, just so I know, who's the objection from? Is it if my predecessor filed it, I would waive it.
I have 223 objection to judge and intervention. Nicholas Davis.
Oh, well, Nicholas Davis will waive that, Judge.
That's
I can
what
talk to him.
That's the right answer, Mr. Davis.
Well, but everybody's going to have to agree.
Well, Judge, we also don't have an objection.
Nor do we, Your Honor.
No, I don't.
I will say no.
I wish somebody would object to me.
I would say I am signed up for advanced family law, though.
Okay, no, I am too, so don't worry about that.
No objection, Your Honor.
Objection. Miss Parker, do you have an objection to me hearing the trial in this case? No, ma'am. Okay. Mr. Stevens, that's real important. Did you get all that on the record? Okay, thank you. I make sure I got everybody, lawyer wise. Okay, I will mark that as waived. I frankly think we're going to need to have another hearing, a special hearing before we have any trial. I'm just talking with y'all now. What do y'all think? I don't think we're ready to just bang into trial.
I would agree, Your Honor. I think there's bound to be motions from the parties as we approach trial of various natures, and not even just the usual in limines that would be heard right before trial. I think there'll be some.
Okay. I mean, the reason I'm even discussing with y'all is the dismissal date conveniently is 9/11. And then we have summer, and I just think we need to talk about. If we have there's also not a jury demand made, and the jury demand deadline's already passed. So anyway, just FYI, how long do y'all think we would need for trial?
Oh boy.
At least this long, Judge.
Yeah, I was going to say, normally I say
5
a week
days
for a
Yeah.
CPS trial, but I wouldn't be surprised at all with the number of parties and interveners that this theoretically would go longer than a week.
Let me do this. Let me look at the calendar. If I'm going to hear the trial, I'm not going to order y'all to go to mediation because I think that would be a waste of y'all's time, money, and efforts.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to think that's right. It's also, like Mr. Rogers said, very difficult to know pending resolution and some developments on the criminal side. But also, I would just submit that, we're kind of just coming in and taking over on behalf of Ms. Shell. So there's going to be a lot of work that needs to be done to catch up and get up to speed. And so I do agree. I think any final trial, there would be a lot of work that needs to be done beforehand, and also multiple motions that would be filed pending the trial. And it would likely be a multi-day thing.
As far as that mediation, I mean, I think that at some point it could be useful, but in the heat of it right now, might take another hearing before everybody's on board with that. So at this point, I agree with you, Judge. I don't think it's going to be beneficial right now.
Okay.
Trial wise, one of the reasons why it'd be great to have you hearing it is, you've heard a lot. I don't know how much more you need to get back into. We could probably shortcut trial a little bit. 2 days I could do. But we can comfortably pull 8, 9 off the calendar, Judge.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, well, like I said, I'm going to work this weekend, and I promise I will get y'all a ruling this weekend. Okay. Okay. Well, thank y'all for everybody, lawyers, CASA, Ms. Parker. Thanks everybody for everybody's. Mr. Stevens, thank you the most for filling in so we can get this over with today. You get the more gold stars than everybody else does today. So we are so happy. I'm so happy that we're done. I want to thank everybody, like I said, for bearing with day splitting, just how we've had to do this. Let me throw something else out, y'all. God, I hate to do this, but if we're going to have a trial, I think this case, it's going to be easier to do it in person.
Your Honor, I agree on that.
I agree.
I normally prefer Zoom on everything, but for a trial, I think it would be very awkward.
I know. I hate that because we have lawyers coming from far away, but I think that's just the way we have to.
That's no problem. I agree with that too, Judge.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's
Okay.
in person.
Just to throw out, since we're talking about it, we do have in our courtroom a pretty fancy, it's more like a smart TV that can easily bring in, if people consented, if we had a far-flung witness or two, we could use that technology for the base trial. I would think let's go in person.
Okay. Well, I will get in touch with y'all soon. Y'all try to have a good weekend. Thank y'all. Mr. Stevens,
Thank you, Your Honor.
you get double pay today.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Judge. Bye.